What yelling does to your child's brain. Picture this. It's been a long day. You're exhausted. Dinner is burning on the stove. The homework isn't done. And your child, your sweet, wonderful child, has just knocked an entire glass of juice across the floor, and something inside you just breaks open. The voice that comes out doesn't quite sound like yours. Most parents have been there. Almost every caregiver has had a moment they wished they could take back. This video is not here to judge you for that, not even a little. But today, we're going to talk about something important, something that science has been quietly uncovering for decades. We're going to talk about what happens inside your child's brain when they are yelled at, not to frighten you, not to make you feel guilty, but because understanding this might change everything. The immediate impact of yelling on the child's brain. The moment a child hears a raised, angry voice, even before their mind can process the words, something happens deep inside their brain. There's a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Think of it as the brain's alarm system. Its one job is to scan the environment every second of every day, asking a single question: am I safe? When a child hears yelling, sudden, sharp, unpredictable, the amygdala fires loudly. It doesn't wait to understand context. It doesn't check whether mom is angry at the dishes or at them. It simply sounds the alarm. And when that alarm goes off, the brain shifts into survival mode. The body floods with cortisol and adrenaline, the same stress hormones that would prepare a human being to run from a predator. Heart rate climbs, muscles tighten, the stomach drops. Here's what's remarkable, and a little sobering. Research from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child has shown that the stress response in a child's body during moments of harsh verbal conflict can be physiologically identical to responses triggered by physical threat. The brain does not always distinguish between a raised fist and a raised voice. In that moment, the thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic, language, and learning, essentially goes offline. The child in front of you cannot hear your lesson, cannot absorb your correction, cannot understand your reasoning. They are, in the most literal neurological sense, in survival mode. They are not being defiant. They are not ignoring you. They are flooded. And here's the part that stays with us as we move forward. For most children, this flooding eventually subsides. The alarm quiets. Life goes on. A single moment of raised voices does not define a childhood. But what happens when the alarm goes off again, and again, and again? The effects of repeated stress on the developing brain. The child's brain is not a finished product. It is, especially in the first 12 years of life, a work in constant, breathtaking construction. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, the brain's extraordinary ability to build and reshape itself based on experience. Every relationship, every repeated emotion, every pattern of interaction is literally wiring the brain. And this is where the science becomes deeply important for every parent to understand. When a child is exposed to repeated, unpredictable stress, whether through chronic yelling, harsh criticism, or a consistently volatile emotional environment, the brain begins to adapt, and not in a good way. The amygdala, that alarm system we talked about, can actually grow in response to chronic stress. Studies using brain imaging have shown that children raised in high-conflict verbal environments often develop a hyperactivated stress response, meaning their alarm goes off more easily, more intensely, and takes longer to quiet down. At the same time, the hippocampus, the region central to memory and learning, can actually shrink under prolonged cortisol exposure. Research published in journals including biological psychiatry has found measurable differences in hippocampal volume in children who experienced significant verbal aggression compared to those who did not. And then there is the corpus callosum, the bridge connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain. A 2011 study from Harvard Medical School found that this critical structure showed reduced connectivity in individuals who had experienced chronic verbal abuse in childhood. What does all of this mean in plain language? It means that a child growing up in an environment of repeated yelling may, over time, develop a brain that is more reactive to threat, less effective at learning and memory, and less able to integrate emotion and reason. Not because anything is wrong with the child, but because the brain, in its profound adaptability, has learned to prioritize survival over everything else. And here is where we must pause, because this is not a sentence on the parent. Life is complicated. Stress is real. Generational patterns run deep. Most people who yell were once children who were yelled at. The brain that struggles to regulate emotion in a parent is often the product of a childhood that was also hard. Understanding the science is not about blame. It is about breaking the cycle with knowledge. How yelling shapes a child's self-identity and inner voice. There is something that happens beyond the biology. Something quieter, but perhaps even more lasting. Children are meaning-making creatures. They are in the business of figuring out the world, and more than anything, they are trying to figure out themselves. And one of the most powerful sources of that self-knowledge, the adults they love most. When a child is repeatedly spoken to with harshness, when the voice they most trust fills with contempt or rage, they don't just experience fear in the moment. They begin to form conclusions. I am the reason they're angry. I am difficult. I am too much. I am not enough. When I make a mistake, something terrible happens. Psychologist Martin Seligman's foundational work on learned helplessness showed that repeated negative experiences, especially unpredictable ones, can teach a child that their actions don't truly matter, that they are powerless to influence what happens to them. This can crystallize into shame, into a self-concept built on the belief that they are fundamentally flawed. And here is the part that echoes through a lifetime. The voice a child hears most becomes the voice they hear inside their own head. The inner critic. The voice that says, "You're going to mess this up," before a job interview at 34. The voice that says, "Why would anyone love you?" in the middle of an otherwise good relationship. Psychologists sometimes call this internalized parental voice, and decades of research in attachment theory confirm that it is one of the most durable legacies of early childhood. This is not a small thing. This is the scaffolding of self-worth, the impact on emotional regulation and behavior. One of the cruelest ironies of the science is this. The very behaviors that often trigger yelling in parents are, themselves, made worse by yelling. When a child lacks emotional regulation, when they melt down, act out, become defiant, or withdrawn, they are not failing on purpose. They are demonstrating the limits of a nervous system that is still, quite literally, under construction. And what a dysregulated child needs, more than anything, is a regulated adult to co-regulate with. But when a child's primary experience of adult emotion is volatility, when anger comes suddenly, loudly, unpredictably, their own nervous system never gets the chance to learn what calm feels like. The modeling that would teach them to manage big feelings is absent. Research by Dr. John Gottman, one of the world's foremost experts on relationships and emotional development, found that children with emotionally dismissive or explosive caregivers had measurably higher levels of stress hormones, more difficulty concentrating, more trouble in peer relationships, and more behavioral challenges at school. The child who gets yelled at for having big emotions often becomes the child who has bigger, harder to manage emotions, and the cycle can feel impossible to escape from the inside. Some children respond by becoming externalizing, acting out, becoming aggressive, pushing boundaries relentlessly. Others become internalizing, anxious, withdrawn, hypervigilant, quietly developing depression. Both are adaptations. Both are the brain trying its best with the tools it has been given. And both deserve compassion, not just from us as viewers, but from the caregivers at the center of these stories, who are often exhausted, overwhelmed, and doing the best they can with what they were given. Long-term effects, adulthood outcomes, and the possibility of healing. We don't stay children forever, but the children we were, they stay inside us. Research on adverse childhood experiences, the landmark ACE studies, has traced the shadows of a difficult childhood all the way into adult health outcomes, increased rates of anxiety, depression, substance use, relational difficulties, even physical health complications. Chronic verbal aggression in childhood is among the experiences that register on that scale. Adults who grew up in high-yelling households are statistically more likely to struggle with emotional regulation in their own relationships, more likely to have difficulty trusting others, more likely to either shut down or explode under stress, because those are the templates they were handed. But here is where the story changes. Because the same neuroplasticity that makes the young brain so vulnerable to damage is also the mechanism of its healing. The brain can change. It does change. Not easily, not overnight, but with the right experiences, safety, attunement, therapy, self-awareness, compassionate relationships, the nervous system can literally rewire itself. Research in post-traumatic growth and in modalities like trauma-focused therapy, mindfulness-based practices, and somatic healing documents this capacity again and again. A child who grew up with chaos can learn what safety feels like and teach their brain to expect it. A parent who was never regulated as a child can learn regulation now and give their children what they themselves never received. That is not a small miracle. That is perhaps the most human thing there is. And for the parents watching this right now, the ones who recognize themselves somewhere in this story, this is for you. You are not a bad parent because you have raised your voice. You are a human being carrying things that were placed in your hands before you were old enough to choose them. The fact that you're here, watching, wanting to understand, that matters. That is the beginning of something. Your child's brain is listening. But more than anything, it is watching. It is watching whether the person they love most is willing to grow, to try, to repair. And repair. The simple act of coming back after a hard moment, sitting down and saying, "I'm sorry, that wasn't okay," is itself a profound neurological event. Rupture and repair, when practiced consistently, teach a child that relationships can be trusted, that they are worth coming back to, that love is something that holds. The science of the developing brain can feel heavy, but underneath all of it, underneath the amygdala and the cortisol and the corpus callosum, there is something wonderfully simple. Children need to feel safe. They need to feel seen. They need to know that the people who love them are bigger than their worst moments. And so do we. If this video moved you, share it with someone who might need it, not as a judgment, but as a gift. because sometimes understanding why is the first step toward doing something differently, and differently, even a little bit, is enough to begin.